Right. Okay, I can see a small sample of you as well, just to, just to let you know. I may not be able to see your questions as you drop them into the chat. Sometimes, at the moment, I can't see the chat. Sometimes you get to see them floating up. It just varies a little bit. But I will allow some time at the end for some conversation, and I'll drop the share. And at that point, I'll be able to see everything. So that'll be great. Thanks very much indeed for your very kind introduction, Joan. And thanks for the invitation to speak to you this morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, and particularly to share a platform with your other speakers, and not least my very good colleague Irene Glendinning, who, as you rightly said, has been doing sterling work with us on our Academic Integrity Advisory Group here at QA. So that's great. So I'm going to talk about these two things, and the contracting to cheat on the one hand, and then I'll round up with a bit of a focus on artificial intelligence, and particularly generative artificial intelligence tools. Perhaps the first thing to say in these modern times is that this presentation is not brought to you by ChatGPT. I think there's been a little bit of a trend of people talking you through something, or you read an article and then at the end it says this was actually written by one of the bots. This is a presentation I have indeed put together with my own fair hands. So there we are. We can see maybe at the end you'll wish I had been a robot, but let's just strap in and see how it goes. So QAA, as you say, is a UK-wide body. We've got a lot of international links. We do deliver tailored approaches in the 4 nations, so the quality arrangements are a little bit different. However, when it comes to matters of academic integrity and generally matters of securing academic standards, we work pretty much across the UK. So the way in which some of our work is implemented will be tailored to the different contexts, but actually we have pretty much a UK-wide approach. And it was especially with the changes that happened in the English sector around about 2017. Well, we certainly knew they were coming in 2017 with the establishment of the regulator there, the Office for Students. We in QA were a little bit concerned about the extent to which we would still be able to have that holistic view of quality and standards across the piece. And therefore, we convened the Academic Integrity Advisory Group, of which Irene is a member, and this was to support us in having that UK-wide approach and being certain that we were paying close attention to the business of securing academic standards in particular, but thinking about the quality of the student learning experience generally. One of the first pieces of advice or guidance that group worked with us on was producing this document, Contracting to Cheat in Higher Education. And which we've updated a number of times since, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So, why were we focusing on contract cheating? As Joan said, in the good old days, it might simply have been a case of students working together, or perhaps asking for a friend who had studied the same module or the same course the year before, if they could have a look at their assessments, and then perhaps submitting something that bore a resounding resemblance to those assessments. We were finding those kind of things, but actually we were finding that increasingly there were organisations that were actually commercially offering those services. So they were offering to complete students' assignments for money, very unfortunately. And to give you an indication of the scale of the challenge, if I were able to see all of you, I'd be asking for a bit of a show of hands to see how many of you have experienced students using contract cheating services, or SEMILs as they're colloquially known. But in 1998, colleagues at Swansea University carried out a study looking at an international scan, and they found that 1 in 7 recent graduates actually admitted they self-declared that they had paid somebody to undertake an assignment for them. So that amounts to 31 million students right across the globe. So it's not happening only in the UK. And it was really evident that these organisations, these SEMILs, and the business of contracting with them was increasing rapidly over time. It was accelerating furiously. And at that time, in 1998, QA estimated that there were about 1,000 SEMILs in operation across the world. And they, of course, a lot of the SEMILs, they can operate outside of the UK, but they may very well be contacting students within the UK, and they do behave in pretty nefarious manners. So they don't always present themselves in a straightforward way as saying, run out of time to write your essay, pay us and we'll do it for you. They quite often they're much more insidious in the way that they operate. So they might contact students and say, would you like some assistance with your academic writing, so they can look legitimate. And one of the other things that we found was that particularly during the lockdowns and the pandemic, that students were really being targeted by these outfits. Because the commercial organisations knew that students were isolated. They were isolated from their institutions. Their institutions had had extremely rapidly and welcomely moved assessment and all kinds of support online, and you've done it so quickly that sometimes it's tricky for students to tell what was legitimate, what had legitimately come from their institution and what actually might have come from elsewhere. So these essay mills are actually contacting students saying, are you feeling it? Would you like some support? We can help you. We'll provide you with a community to give you assistance. And once students have entered into a conversation with these outfits, it's very difficult for them to get away again. And they also make themselves very vulnerable to being blackmailed. One of the things we have found is that behind these actually their main business of many of the essay mills is not providing a cheating service at all. It's actually about buying data, and that's behind some of them. There's a lot of organised crime and so on. So this is a front to gather data, so it's really desperate. So I feel sorry for a number of the students who get themselves embroiled in this, and they can look forward to a lifetime of being, or certainly a long extended period of being desperately bothered by them. Our Australian counterpart, TEXA, the Quality and Standards agency there, authority there, they found that essay mills had actually begun compromising the Australian universities' websites. So they found that there was actually cyber attacks on the website. So the essay mills were creating, and they were setting in forms of malicious code. So they were inserting code in so that their services looked as though they were actually a unit or a department of the university. So again, to draw more students in, they set up links to alleged competitions that looked very legitimate. So they were really, it was really, really big business, and that they were being much more muscular in the way in which they were approaching students. And for these reasons, we felt that we really needed to we need to take a multi-pronged approach. We need for academic colleagues to be very vigilant, to watch what's happening to students. We wanted to share information to alert students themselves and alert staff to the potential challenge. We obviously shared the findings of our Australian counterpart with colleagues, and we worked with JISC in the sector to help support institutions to look out for these cyber attacks and be very vigilant about them. We also noted that in a number of countries, in Australia in particular and in the Republic of Ireland, essay mills, the essay mill operation was outlawed, so it was made illegal. And so one of the things that a former colleague of mine, Gareth Crossman, worked with a number of our colleagues in the Academic Advisory Committee, Academic Advisory Group, to have legislation introduced in the UK to ban essay mills. And we were successful in doing that as far as England is concerned. The Skills and Post-16 Education Act, which came into law last year, that does have a provision in it to make the actions of these essay mills illegal. We are still working with the governments and the devolved administrations to bring about similar legislation. The governments are very supportive of the idea of doing that, but of course they're not going to create an act about that in its own right. So they're looking at when there will be adjustments to legislation that they can add in a clause here. Of course, having legislation to make the essay mills illegal is not the end of the story, because you have to catch them and you have to see if you can actually make use of the legislation, and that's an area that has been quite challenging. to say the least. It is very important for me to say that this legislation criminalises the SE mills and the contract cheating agencies. It does not criminalise the students for engaging with them, because, you know, as I say, there can be many reasons why students can be tricked into engaging with these outfits. So we updated our contracting to cheat guidance in the light of that legislation. There were some adjustments we wanted to make to it. If you haven't had a look at it up to now, then please do. It's a reasonably long document, but it's chunked out. It identifies a number of guiding principles for example, working in partnership with your students to help with this challenge. But a lot of students have an extreme, you know, while there are students who are paying people to complete their work for them, and indeed there are some students who are being paid to complete work, and so I'm not, you know, suggesting it does go on, but mercifully they are, you know, in the minority, but the vast majority of students take an incredibly dim view of that kind of behaviour. And certainly when we're working with students in our Student Strategic Advisory Committee, that's one of the great concerns they have, and they're very, very eager to work with staff on making sure that we stamp out the kind of poor behaviour. So working in partnership with you know, your many students will be supportive, but also explaining to students who might be tempted to engage in that kind of work, talking to them about why that is not a good idea. It's not a shortcut that's going to lead to all kinds of problems later, and you know, not least of it means that they, you know, really frankly are not getting very much out of their degree if in fact someone else is completing the work for them. But it really is going to make life very challenging for them, and they complete, because getting the degree is not just about a badge. It actually conveys a set of things that they know and are able to do later, and they're going to be found out doing that, and just, you know, lead to some unpleasantness later on. But so engaging and working in partnership with your students really is at the heart of almost all of our guidance. Having an institution-wide approach is also one of the other guiding principles I want to really emphasise, because, you know, a number of students are studying joint degrees, but also we know in all kinds of ways students are likely to hear a repeated message. If it's part of a nested approach, it's part of institutional strategy, it then works its way through faculties, departments, schools, whatever your organisational structure might be. It makes students realise it's not just what their tutor, it's not just one member of staff who's telling them this, actually it is part of a concerted and holistic approach. The document also identifies a number of key action points around supporting students, like emphasising to them the importance, indeed the great value of developing skills in academic writing, making them think about the use of academic sources, what it might mean to paraphrase, when paraphrasing is legitimate and when it tips into actually just copying or plagiarising, and thinking about those research skills. And we're very grateful for working with the sector, and including working with Professor Kath Ailsa in New South Wales. She has been at the forefront of a lot of work to counter SEMIL and contract cheating behaviour, and has been a great support right across the world, but particularly for us. So that's the contracting to cheat piece. We also in 2020 established our Academic Integrity Charter for UK higher education, and I'd encourage you to have a look and see if you know if your university has signed up. And we've got over 200 signatories, including comprehensive sign-ups to this by the institutions in Scotland and in Wales, and it's been endorsed by a variety of the governments. So what the Academic Integrity Charter means is it signals a commitment to promoting good academic practice. And I really would encourage, we certainly encourage all of our QA members, so there's still quite a few who haven't quite signed up to it yet. And it's quite a short document. It's again set out in a number of principles for academic integrity. Some of the things I've been talking about already, about having a whole community approach, the importance of working together as a sector, the real importance of having consistent and effective institutional policies and practice in place, again engaging with your students, making them aware of the kinds of challenges and making them aware of the real benefits of good practice. But it also recognises, while the Charter sets out these principles, for academic integrity, we do recognise the autonomy of institutions. So you have a lot of flexibility within it to implement these principles in a way that fits your institutional or indeed your department's context. I think that's really important. You have to see that it's, you know, it has to be ownership. You're not doing it because QA has identified in a document. You're doing it, hopefully it's something that's helpful and setting out that kind of baseline or framework for your own practice. And that isn't where it has stopped. We've produced a vast array of guidance and support, including live events, which you can have a look at, and which we're encouraging colleagues from the sector to share their experience to get a little bit of that, the grist in the middle, or the sand in the oyster. But we have a real variety of short pieces, which hopefully are helpful in picking up different dimensions of the challenge. A lot of our members were really interested in finding out more about how other providers manage cases of misconduct when they come up. They're interested in the fact that there can be quite a lot of variety. Sometimes there can be variety within institutions, and that's something that you want to look out for. You know, are misconduct cases treated differently in different parts of your institution? And that, you know, because it's clearly going to be a challenge for students who have a joint degree, but it also sends out a bit of a mixed message, doesn't it? Which doesn't mean to say that everything has to be absolutely uniform, because there might be reasons for contextualizing things in a particular way. But generally, I think it is helpful in trying to address many things, but particularly misconduct cases, if it's very clear to students what's likely to happen to them, or how their case will be handled. So we carried out a piece of research work looking across the UK at how these cases are handled in different parts of the sector. We've identified some commonalities and some areas where there was still a bit of distance, and we looked at in depth at penalties as well, because the penalties can be quite different. So the same type of misconduct might be treated quite differently, sometimes, as I say, in different parts of an institution, but more particularly between different institutions. So whereas some institutions might actually have terminated a student's study at their place, another institution would have given the student some other form of penalty, but the student would still have been able to complete their degree. There was also some discussion within our academic integrity advisory group about when students might move from one institution to the other. And that's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because, you know, well, not all students are are necessarily young, but they might be, a bit ill-informed. And, there might come a point at which, even if they have conducted quite a serious piece of misconduct, how long do we want that to hang around them for? Does that mean that they shouldn't ever be able to complete studies anywhere? So, how can we go about reforming them? So there's some quite kind of tricky things like that we discuss within the advisory group, taking advice from colleagues who are researching actively and who are working as active academics in the sector. As well as colleagues who work in the professional services departments too. So we've carried out that research, we've shared the outcomes from it, and we share case studies. And as I say, it's an active part of our discussion in the advisory group. Particularly through pandemic times, we had a real focus on digital assessment and looking at how you can design assessment securely, given what I said about the vulnerability of students to cyber attack and so on. And I know you're going to be looking at some of the digital assessment practices a little bit later on today. And the term proctoring, which as I think come from the States probably originally, but it became quite widely bandied around in the UK as well, particularly during pandemic times. We're thinking about how you could supervise and invigilate or proctor assessments, or students carrying out assessments. There are a number of challenges about doing that, not just the sort of operational ones, but there's certainly some problematic features of digital proctoring. So a number of institutions use digital services to invigilate students who are carrying out exams in a digital space. And there were some really serious issues with some of those digital services, which we wanted to flag and highlight to institutions so that you can be aware of them, and you can then make your own decision about whether you want to use them, or if you are going to use them, think about how you're going to go about doing that. And very much our work comes from a student perspective. It's thinking about what does this look like from a student's eye point of view. And we produced at the end of last calendar year this Quality Compass piece, which is looking at academic integrity from a student perspective and thinking about what it means or how it might sound to student ears. And we've also, in the current academic year, we're supporting 2 collaborative enhancement projects, which for us are where they're led by one of our QA member institutions. We provide a bit of funding for them, and they work in partnership with either a small or a larger collection of other institutions to explore an area and then to produce a range of outputs that will be helpful for all of our members, indeed, and hopefully the whole sector. So we're supporting 2 in the area of academic integrity at the moment. And we've got over 40 projects that we supported over the piece. It's the 3rd year we've been doing it, but 2 of them have this focus on academic integrity. This one here, led by Oxford Brookes University, is linking academic integrity considerations with accessibility and inclusion. And this was recognising that there are groups of students with particular characteristics are often overrepresented in academic misconduct cases. And this group of institutions wanted to look at, well, why is that the case, and is there action that you as institutions can take to anticipate that and hopefully help the students to perform with good academic integrity or good practice, rather than being tempted into areas of poorer practice. And this particular project has produced a vast array of information. I'll highlight where you can find the link from the QA website to these projects, because it's got lots of really helpful resources, including this set of student voice videos talking about slightly different aspects of academic integrity. The other project is still on, the Oxford Brookes one has just about completed, and that's why there's such an array of resources available now. The other project is led by the colleagues at Loughborough University, and that's looking at another of what I often refer to as sort of the grey areas of academic integrity. So thinking about, when does collaboration with your peers become collusion? You know, when is it a good thing because it's a good skill of team working, but when is it starting to tip into being problematic? When, and looking at, as well at practices like proofreading. So when does getting your mum to proofread your essay represent a reasonable thing to do, and when is that problematic? When does paying somebody to proofread your essay, when is that acceptable? And there may be circumstances under which that is acceptable, but when does that become somebody else's work? So really looking at those kind of areas that can be so very tricky. But looking back at the Oxford Brookes Collaborative Enhancement Project, just to flag, as well as the videos, there's a real array of material that can be picked up by staff and students. And the Oxford Brookes project also created this a student academic integrity champion model, where they're drawing on those students who are very keen on the best of practice and flagging it with them and helping them to work with their peers to support good practice. But it's a real big array of different things, different games and interactive things that you can use in situ, you can use in the classroom, whether that's a virtual classroom or whether it's you're in person, as well as some resources that you can use with staff as well to talk to them about, to really understand what is academic integrity, what is it that we're talking about, what are the kind of behaviours we're looking at, and what are the ways in which you can promote that good practice and steer people away from less positive things. So lots of stuff to look at there. And then in those were in those perhaps more innocent times of encouraging students to make sure that their work is all of their own and that the qualification is the result of their own endeavours. Along comes something like ChatGPT, not by any means the only generative artificial intelligence tool, but it's the one that's grabbed all of the headlines. So this question here, we'll maybe get to it at the end, because I will, as I say, I'll pause and allow time for some questions and discussion. This is something I would encourage you to think about, is using generative artificial intelligence tools. It's not cheating, is it? Is it cheating to use those tools? That's something that we've been thinking about quite a lot. And right now, we're faced with what I've described as the twin peaks of the challenge. So we need to manage assessments right now, and I'm sure that's pretty much at the top of your agendas, and I'm well aware that there are also other challenges around managing assessment, like the marking and assessment boycott that you're needing to face, and I understand the reasons why staff are engaged in that, but just to say, appreciate a range of challenges. But there is this issue that these generative AI tools are not new, but they have accelerated, and they have become ubiquitous, and we know that they are just about to be integrated into everyday packages. So they're going to be integrated into Microsoft Office. We know that Google Bard is, widely available as part of the search engine. Many of them are free, but not all of them are. So there are other challenges around accessibility, or the potential for uneven accessibility on the part of students to them. So we also know that the tools they're developing really rapidly. They're only going to get better and better. So right now they're probably the worst that they're ever going to be, or the least competent that they'll ever be. And right now we have imperfect solutions because they've become so widely available during the academic year in which your assessments are already written, indeed may already have been out for students to be completing, and now you're receiving many of them back in and are needing to think about it. And the students, will have had this access, or some of them, it's been quite uneven, because I have still been, as part of some of my work, I'm a trustee with the Edinburgh Napier Students Association, and I was chatting with some students there, a couple of whom had never heard of ChatGPT, probably revising too hard for their exams in their own room or something. But so it has been uneven, but many students are very familiar with it and its counterpart tools. So they've already been engaging with it before perhaps your institution or your department were able to issue them with any guidance about how you were hoping they might engage with it. So it presents a massive challenge for you, and it is. Some people are claiming that it's really easy to spot things that have been through an artificial intelligence tool. Obviously, the image there is they don't always get hands right. We don't always know the data they're using. They don't always get their facts right either. There's ChatGPT in particular, certainly GPT-4 rather, a sort of development on. From OpenAI, from the company that developed it, it will generate references. That was a problem with ChatGPT initially. It wasn't referencing items, so it would provide you with text, but it didn't give students any of the references, or didn't give anybody any of the references who were using it. Later iterations and some of the other tools will give you references, but they may have made them up. They may not exist. And so there are challenges, they're imperfect, but so are our solutions for this as well. And sometimes spotting what has been created by one of these tools and what has been created by human hand is really remarkably difficult. So we don't underestimate the challenge, and we need to think about, where are these things going in the future? You'll have heard lots of analogies with the introduction of the calculator and the introduction of search engines. So Google itself, was using search engine and cheating, all of that. So a lot of these things are being revisited. Mercifully, the principles that we have developed as a sector around academic integrity, they still hold. So talking to your students, having an institution-wide approach, thinking about assessment design. But I don't underestimate the extent to which thinking about assessment design is tricky when your assessments are designed and maybe even complete, fully or partly completed. So our thinking on this so far is that trying to ban these tools is futile. It's really difficult to detect them. There are detection tools. Of course, the tech companies have developed detection tools that they will happily sell you. They recognize that they can't detect them universally. I was in an event yesterday at the Global Academic Integrity Network with colleagues from, as the title suggests, right across the world, colleagues in South Africa, your tech experts were talking to us about the different tools. We were looking at different detection tools and the fact that they detect things differently in different places. So they're not, they are very, very far from foolproof, and it's not clear how close we would be to having digital detection tools that will actually be effective. So we don't think that banning them is going to be the way to go. And in any event, actually, a little bit like some of those other inventions, like the calculator and and Google and all our search engines, all the rest of it, there is a lot of opportunity with them as well. So for every person I've met who's going, oh God, it's going to be terrible, not knowing who's students or who's conducted the work, and students will just get AI to sort out their assessments for them. For everyone who's got that concern at the forefront, I am meeting other staff who are highlighting the great benefits in engaging in this. Although I did also, our chief executive, Vicky Stott, we were engaged in some other work with colleagues looking at the different tools. And one of the bits of advice they gave to us was engage with the tools, find out about them, because it's really helpful to know how they work and what their capabilities are. And one of the ways that you can test the accuracy of an AI tool is to ask it to tell you about yourself, because obviously you know all the facts about yourself. So see what it tells you about yourself. So our chief executive did exactly that, and she found that it had given her a PhD and it had given her a range of academic publications. Now, that's a massive time-saving device. Unfortunately, she doesn't have either of those things, so it wasn't wholly accurate, but still but that was quite a good piece of advice. So if it can't get those kind of things right, then you do have to start to wonder about the other bits of information it's giving you. But the tools are getting better and better. They can provide a really helpful starting point. And we anticipate, if not already, then certainly in the future, employers are going to expect students to be familiar with these and indeed to have skills in engaging with AI, because we're probably all going to be using it for all kinds of things in the future, either as your starting point to create something, or perhaps for checking a piece of work at the end of it. But when I'm talking about work there, I'm not necessarily talking about academic work, but work out in the wild there. So there's a lot of opportunity around them as well. But at the same time, there's a lot of questions, and I've highlighted some of them here. What does responsible use look like? To what extent do you expect your students to tell you how they've used it and what the impact of that has been? Thinking more to the future, what about the loss of individual voice? Does that matter to people? Are you happy that you're, potentially you're going to lose your own voice and your own ways of expressing things, but you're going to subcontract that out to AI altogether? And we're also hearing that actually the tools, certainly at the moment, who knows into the further future, but at the moment the tools are very good at managing data and managing pieces of information that already exist. But what about new knowledge generation? That's one of the wonderful things about working in higher education, is that you're working really close to what is already known and helping people to discover new things that are not yet known. And that's very exciting about higher education. What will the impact of artificial intelligence tools be on that? It could be a great support for that work, but we need to bear in mind, and what happens to the nature of academic awards? What even happens to the value of them? Does that, will that change? But does the delivery and certainly the assessment of the awards, does what students expect and what they do in order to achieve their award, to what extent is that going to change? Are we sitting on the cusp of a bit of an industrial revolution for higher education? Maybe. So just a few small questions that we've been pondering. So what have we been doing about generative AI? We ran a series of open webinars, and you can see the links to these here. These have taken place already, but they were all recorded, and they are a really good listen. They're really lively conversations. The first one, which seemed like a legitimate question when we first thought of about to ban or not to ban, but I've already mentioned that we think that there's just no point in even attempting to ban it. So we need to learn to live with these tools. Indeed, as I say, there are lots of opportunities. The second discussion was around using ChatGPT and the like as a force for good. And that one, if you have time to only listen to one or parts of one, I would really highlight that one, because it was particularly helpful in not just listening to people talking about, what are the main challenges around this area, but actually sharing some practical examples of using, of the ways in which what the tools are about, what they can do, but also in looking at how the many and various ways in which they can be used legitimately to good and useful ends. And the final one was looking at a nature assessment and thinking about how that can change. We produced at the start of the calendar year a short briefing paper flagging some of the key questions and reinforcing some of our principles. we're just working on now finalising a further piece of generative artificial intelligence advice. So it is looking at what you can do right now. So thinking about some of the things that you might need to think about in the current academic year. And we'll be publishing that on Tuesday, and then the 9th of May, we're coordinating with a piece that the BBC are going to be running in this neck of the woods. So we've got that piece coming out then. And we're also working on some further advice for assessment design, thinking into next academic year, and that will come out in sort of end of June or into July more likely. And another area that we anticipate having, we're working with some colleagues from a member institution, looking at the impact on research degrees and thinking about particular features around that. That event will happen in the summer. We just haven't quite got the date yet, so it's probably looking at June, we think, but we're just finalising dates there. We have a web page that you can keep up to date with all of our different bits of work. So if you go onto the QA home site, so if you just Google QA, our homepage will come up pretty quickly. And along the top of your screen, you'll see that banner, the About Us, I've highlighted. So if you click on the membership area, that will give you this drop-down list. You can, the other yellow or orangey highlight is members resources. So if your institution is in QA membership, which I think you all probably will be, so we've got over 300 members across the UK and just about every university. So you can click on membership resources, you log in yourself, you set your own password. If you've already logged in, then it will remember you and you just go straight in. If you've got any problems, get in touch with us and we'll get you logged right in. You can see a whole vast array of resources, but you can also, I've circled in red there where our academic integrity information is, and that will let you link into all of the pieces of advice and guidance that I've talked about today, including the collaborative enhancement projects. And we've got a specific page that talks about ChatGPT and generative AI, which links out of that academic integrity page. So if you go onto that, you will have access. So quite a lot of our materials are openly available on the open website, and then some of our more detailed resources, like this, the information about our research piece on misconduct cases and so on, that you'll find in the membership resources, but you can link to them from the website. So that is a quick tour of some of the things we've been thinking about working on, and hopefully some of the things that will help you out. I know Irene's going to talk to you about institutional practices in greater depth, and that's something that Irene has really led on for us within our advisory group, and we're very grateful to her for. But for now, thanks very much for your attention. I am going to stop the share, and I'm really happy to take any questions or comments from you.
Okay, Ailsa, thank you very much. I'm delighted, for one, to see that the QAA have really taken this on board, and it's a very serious issue, not just for academics, but for the bodies that are responsible